Thank you, Dot, and thank you to ILSI for inviting me to be with you today. When I first received the invitation and saw the planned agenda, I realized I would be with a lot of food scientists, and where does an economist fit in? But I've seen this morning, the openness to understand things through a different lens, and so I'm really glad to be with you to talk about some work that my team have been doing in the food sustainability space, having had the stage for this set very nicely by the talks of Evan and David before me. We, as all of us, wonder about food sustainability. How is our food produced? What are we supposed to be eating? Will we have enough food to feed the world in the future? All these large questions. So we at the EIU have developed a benchmarking process to try to understand some of these big problems in the world. It all started with some work that we did with a global peace index and a global democracy index. So having tried to understand the drivers of peace and democracy, this has led us on to other big topics of our time. So I'm here today to talk to you about some of that work so that we can understand the intersection between the demand for sustainably produced food and the supply of it. I just want to give you an overview of this particular project. As David said earlier, benchmarks. How do we measure? How do we measure what we need to understand in terms of food sustainability, food security, and food safety? And as I said, our benchmarking approach at the IU, in this instance, supported by the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, allowed us to look at food sustainability across a set of food systems in 34 countries. This looks at three key pillars, or three key paradoxes of our time that we've all thought about in some way, shape, or form. Food loss and food waste. How is it that in our world, almost 1 billion people suffer from hunger, but a third of the food that's produced is lost or wasted? What policies can change that? Sustainable agriculture. We know that the world is running out of cultivable land. We know that our resources have to be used carefully, and we know that processes need to be adopted on a sustainable paradigm for the future. And then nutritional challenges. How is it that there are people in any given country who are working to beat obesity, while there are others who are going to bed hungry every night? So these three paradoxes from the Milan Protocol of 2015, as you may recall, in 2015, the World's Fair was held in Milan, the Expo Milano, with a focus on food. So Italy's gift to the world has been to raise this question on a global level along these three paradigms. So this is the focus of this study. But of course, with any good study or issue, you have to start with a central definition. And what is sustainability? Every time I mention the word sustainability, someone tells me it's out of fashion. There's a new way of thinking about it. But for now, we stick with a central definition of sustainability. It's defined as the ability of a country's food system to be maintained without depletion and exhaustion of natural resources or compromises to health and integrity, and without compromising future generations' access to food. So sorry to read the whole thing out, but all these central definitions become almost like a poem. Each word is full of meaning. So we'll talk about this more as we go through the presentation. So the key to understanding any big problem that we observe in the world is getting a framework, and a framework for action, a framework for understanding. And in this case, we want it to be a theory of change. What do we understand about where we are, and how do we make progress, and how do we take action? So the three areas, the three paradoxes, food loss and waste, nutritional challenges, and sustainable agriculture, were divided into a series of indicators. In this study, there are actually a total of 36 indicators and a total of 52 sub-indicators. So times 34 countries, you can imagine how many data points that comes up with. But let me just talk through the categories and what we were trying to achieve with each one. The first category is food loss and waste. We rely upon a lot of the work done by the FAO that tells us Food loss is a percentage of total food produced. And then what is the policy response to that? And then what are the causes of distributional food loss? Is the road infrastructure of a poor quality? Is storage not up to standard? And then we look at some solutions to that at the policy level. We also look at food waste in 2 or 3 different dimensions. First of all, just as what is the sheer amount of food waste per capita per year? And then what is that policy response? The second big category for the index was sustainable agriculture. This is probably our largest category, our most ambitious. We were trying to look at the use of all the inputs to agriculture as well as agricultural practices, but also probably more importantly is what is the sustainable model that exists for agriculture in any given country, in which case we're looking at not just how the food is produced, but who is producing it and what inputs do they have and what processes are they using. So central to the sustainable agriculture category is looking at the extent to which the countries are addressing issues with the water footprint, with fish stocks, and with using of recycled resources, as well as all the sustainable agriculture practices that are prominent these days. But also, what is the profile of farmers? We know that farmers are an aging population. It's hard to get young people to enter the sector. In some parts of the world that women are not that well represented, and they're, again, young people. So what is the sort of, not just the environmental profile of agriculture, but what is the human capital profile, as well as the outlook for the future. So our third category, probably of more interest to the folks at this in the room today, is the nutritional challenges. We've been talking about that a bit this morning. This category presents some data, outcome data on the consumption of food and the related issues: undernourishment, stunting, areas of deficiency, areas of life, what is your life expectancy, prevalence of overweight, dailies, but we also tried to introduce some lifestyle questions and some new metrics, such as what is the daily physical activity, how much time are people spending in front of computer screens, and then what is your consumption of sugar, meat, and salt. Sorry, we all consume it, I consume it, it's in the measurement. And then looking at some other economic factors, the Gini coefficient, and then but more importantly is, what is the policy response? We know that we all want to eat better. What information and policies help guide us along those choices? So we also rated countries on the policy response to dietary patterns. To what extent do countries have a nutrition education program? How efficacious is this? How widespread is it? And then to what extent are there policies that are supporting positive action in these areas? I've included at the bottom of the screen on the slides the actual link to the study. I know I'm talking a lot about it without showing you the actual study, so I would encourage you at your leisure to go to the website. We have a visualization of the results, as well as the data workbook from the study that will give you a breakdown of how all the countries scored along these issues, and then detail on the indicators and the sources and the methodology. A global study. So in the first year of the study, we looked at the G20 plus a set of 5 more countries. You can see we tried to look for a good global representation here, not just developed countries, in which led us to the inclusions of some countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And then for the second year, Barilla wanted to rise to the challenge that is being put forth by Jeff Sachs and many others, is to explore the impact of the Mediterranean diet and what do Mediterranean countries provide to us in terms of standards and production. So we added this year 9 Mediterranean countries 8 Mediterranean countries, and then we didn't have enough representation in Europe, so we added Sweden. And so the study took a focus more on diet and nutrition this year, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the main thing about our selection set is that it includes 85% of global GDP and 2/3 of global population. So it's amazing that with 35 countries, you can actually reach that level. So I've talked a lot about the study and the metrics and the benchmarking approach. We have a lot of data and information. We had a lot of that presented this morning, a lot of the key metrics around what is being produced, what are we eating, what are the supply and demand factors. But what is really influencing us beyond that is the policies. So we see that the countries who score well on the index, those who are doing the best in terms of integrating low levels of food loss and waste, a good sustainable agriculture sector, and healthy populations who have access to nutritious food, it's really a policy driver that makes the difference. So we see, here I put forth what are the key policy conclusions or the policy strength areas. And the first one, of course, is policies to address food loss being at the production level. We've seen in many countries, particularly in the EU, that the introduction of support policies for farmers to help address food loss, to help improve the quality of roads and the quality of storage has an immediate impact on reducing the amount of food loss in that country. But probably even more important and more interesting is the policy impact of policies to address food waste. And we're talking about food waste at the commercial and household level. The winner in this area last year was France with their regulation on food waste. It had an immediate impact on the level of food wasted per capita in the country almost within a year. So, and we've seen in other instances when countries have enacted this specific legislation, the impact is very direct and very exciting and inspirational. Some other key areas, of course, are animal welfare policies. To what extent is animal husbandry? Is there governance of that sector? Working conditions for agricultural workers. We all know that the exposure to chemicals and fertilizers, as well as just the backbreaking labor of agriculture, is a key factor. For people in agriculture, it's the reason young people don't want to join it. It's the reason women can't be involved in some aspects of it. So policies that help improve the working conditions in the farm sector immediately have an impact on the sustainability of the agricultural system. The quality of policy response to dietary patterns, as I said earlier, having a sense of and nutrition education, having a sense in the country that of the diet. We've heard a lot about the Harvard program this morning. Almost every country in the world has some sort of guidance or guidelines on food consumption, be it the plate, the pyramid, the pagoda. But all countries realize the importance of this. It's also included at the educational level, reaching children with this information early, helping us all to overcome the omnivore's dilemma. What do we need to eat to have a healthy and active life? And here I've just sort of summarized some of the key findings from the study. Again, looking at food systems at the country level and looking at levels of food loss and waste, sustainable ag, and nutritional outcomes. What do we know about high-performing countries and those who need to improve? What do they need to do? And summarized here are some issues that even high-performing countries have challenge areas that still need to be addressed to maximize food sustainability. And these are environmental biodiversity. All countries struggle with this issue. Diversity, women and youth in farming, as I've said, this has been identified as a key factor. The average age of farmers, young people don't want to go into farming. It's not It's not sexy, it's not inviting, it's backbreaking. The patterns of urbanization that we see around the world, people want to be in cities with urban jobs. Being in a rural area with an agricultural job is really not even on the radar for many young people. And then, of course, salt, sugar, and meat consumption. We all know the data there. It sort of reigns true in every country. These are still on the high levels, and we know that that's an area of change. So, as I said, this year we focused on the Mediterranean diet, and our findings there were that, of course, the northern Mediterranean countries, Spain, Italy, Greece, they perform well across the three areas or pillars that we were measuring, but the southern and eastern countries have less sustainable food systems: Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, those in the northern Mediterranean. And what does that mean? So, food loss and food waste. We know that there are insufficient policies to address this in these countries. The northern Mediterranean countries do have these proactive policies to combat food loss and waste, and this makes a huge difference. But also it's the roads, poor road infrastructure and low investment that is a problem for those countries who are lagging. Water management, the index has a number of indicators looking at the water footprint and looking at water withdrawals. We know this is where climate change has a big impact on the area. Drought and desertification are factors certainly for the North African countries of the Mediterranean. So these are issues to be tackled. And then, of course, land management. How is your land being used? And what sort of level of organic agriculture is being embraced in the country? The countries who have tried to make a change in this are making progress, and those benchmarks are, of course, there as inspiration to others. The final thing is nutritional challenges, and we know that malnourishment plagues the Mediterranean countries, and that they suffer increasingly, even though they're the producers of many of the healthy tenets of the Mediterranean diet, they have increasingly less access to it because of climate change and financial access. So we've observed through the study that the Mediterranean countries are suffering from higher obesity rates than Asian countries, but the SEMCs have the lowest results with nutritional deficiencies globally. So some good things still happening, but yet challenges for the region because of climate change and access to nutrition and proper food. And then we know that there are also variances in the recommended consumption of meat and processed food. This is becoming increasingly a problem in the northern Mediterranean. So what does the Food Security Index or a benchmarking study of this type help us do? We know that with all large problems, there's a tendency to think and analyze rather than act. So our goal with the Food Security Index and taking up the ethos of Barilla Foundation is to try to provide some measures that will lead to action. So the best practices that come out from the index showcase those countries who are making strides towards achieving sustainable food systems. So the benchmarks and the learnings become best practice for all. And it highlights, again, policies that can drive sustainability, the social, environmental, and economic outcomes. Typically at the EIU, we look at just economic outcomes, but increasingly in the benchmarks surrounding this issue, we have included, as you've seen, the societal and economic ones. And then not only what are the areas of best practice, but what are the challenges? Where do people need to improve? So the index also points out weaknesses in food systems that require policy interventions and, of course, businesses and consumer action. So the questions that people have: what can I do? What difference can I make? And of course, the issues that are being discussed here: what can food companies do? All these issues can be highlighted in the study, are highlighted in the study, and give some roadmaps for action. And then finally, we need to measure things to understand them, to take the action. So the index does highlight this by providing a data set, an information set, and then an algorithm for understanding the overall results to get to the change that we need. So that's the utility of this study. And then, as David pointed out earlier, none of this work can be done in a vacuum now. We all do this with reference to how this supports these Sustainable Development Goals. I've included a matrix here that just points out the ways in which the study aligns with some of these key goals. We're very proud to be in the second year of the study. As we are developing a longitudinal database, we hope to align this with the tracking of SDG progress, all sum total, but for now, this is our start. So just in sum, I wanted to thank you for letting me present this study. I know it's a lot of detail. I hope you will take some time to look at it on the web, but appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and hope that you'll find that our approach has some utility in thinking about these problems and taking action. Thank you.